Leviticus chapter 13. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying,
When anyone has a swelling, or a rash, or a bright spot on his skin, that may become an infectious skin disease like leprosy, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. The priest shall look at the sore on the skin of the body, and if the hair on the sore is turned white, and the sore appears deeper than the rest of his skin, it is an infectious skin disease. When the priest examines him, he shall pronounce him ceremonially unclean. If the spot on his skin is white, but does not appear to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest is to put the infected person in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine him. If he sees the sore is unchanged and has not spread in the skin, he is to keep him isolated another 7 days. On the next 7th day, the priest is to examine him again, and if the sore has faded and has not spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It was only a rash. The man must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the rash does spread in his skin after he has shown himself to the priest to be pronounced clean, he must appear before the priest again. The priest is to examine him, and if the rash has spread in the skin, he shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious disease. When anyone has an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to the priest. The priest is to examine him, and if there is a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and a spot of raw flesh is in the swelling, then it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not put him in isolation, for he is already pronounced unclean, and there is no question. If the disease breaks out all over the skin, and the infection covers all the skin of the infected person, from his head to his foot, every place the priest looks, then the priest shall examine him, and if the disease has covered his whole body, he shall pronounce that person clean. Since it has all turned white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on him, he will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean, he has an infectious disease. Should the raw flesh change, and then turn white, he must go to the priest. The priest is to examine him, and if the sores have turned white, the priest shall pronounce the infected person clean. He is clean. When someone has a boil on his skin, and the boil heals, and in the place where the boil was, a white swelling or a reddish-white spot appears, he must present himself to the priest. The priest is to examine it, and if it appears to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease that is broken out where the boil was. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in it, and it is not more than skin deep, and is faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. If it should have at all spread over the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease. But if the spot is unchanged and has not spread, then it is only a scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When someone receives a burn by fire on the skin and a reddish white or white spot appears in the raw flesh of the burn, the priest is to examine the spot, and if the hair in it has turned white, and it appears to be more than skin deep, it is an infectious disease that is broken out within the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in the spot, and if the spot is not more than skin deep, and is faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine him again, and if it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease. But if the spot is unchanged and is not spread within the skin, but is faded, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scar from the burn, and not infectious. If a man or a woman has a sore on the head, in the hair, or on the chin, in the beard, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it appears to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest shall pronounce that person unclean. It is an itch, an infectious disease of the head or chin. But if, when the priest examines the sore and it does not seem to be more than skin deep, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest is to put the infected person in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine the sore, and if the itch has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and it does not appear to be more than skin deep, then he must be shaved, except for the diseased area, and the priest is to keep him in isolation another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is again to examine the itch, and if it has not spread in the skin, and appears to be no more than skin deep, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the itch does spread within the skin after he is pronounced clean, the priest is to re-examine him. If the itch then has spread in the skin, the priest does not need to look for yellow hair. There is no question. The person is unclean. But if, in his judgment, it is unchanged, and black hair has grown in it, the itch has healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or woman has white spots on the skin, the priest is to examine them. If the spots are dull white, then it is a harmless rash which has broken out on the skin. That person is clean. When a man has lost his hair and is bald, he is clean. If he has lost his hair from the front of his scalp and has a bald forehead, he is clean. But if he has a reddish white sore on his bald head or forehead, it is an infectious disease breaking out on his head or forehead. The priest is to examine him, and if the swollen sore on his head or his forehead is reddish white like an infectious skin disease, the man is diseased and is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean because of the sore that is on his head. The person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes, uncover his head, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." He shall be unclean all the days he has the sore. He is unclean and shall live alone. He must live outside the camp. And if any clothing is contaminated with mildew, woolen or linen clothing, any woven or knitted material of linen or wool, any leather or anything made of leather, and if the contamination in the clothing or leather or woven or knitted material or any leather article is greenish or reddish, it is a spreading mildew and must be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine the mildew and isolate the article in question for 7 days. On the 7th day he is to re-examine it, and if the mildew has spread in the clothing, in the woven or knitted material, or in the leather, whatever its use, it is a destructive mildew. The article is unclean. He must burn up the clothing, the woven or knitted material of wool or linen, or any leather article having the contamination in it. The mildew is destructive. The article must be burned up. But if, when the priest examines it, the mildew has not spread in the clothing, or the woven or knitted material, or the leather article, he shall give instructions for the contaminated article to be washed. Then he is to isolate it for another 7 days. After the article in question has been washed, and after these 7 days have passed, the priest is to re-examine it. If the mildew has not changed its appearance, even though it has not spread, it is unclean. Burn it with fire, whether the mildew has affected one side or the other. But if, when the priest examines it, the mildew has faded after the article has been washed, he is to tear the contaminated part out of the clothing, or the woven or knitted material, or the leather. But if it reappears in the clothing, the woven or knitted material, or in the leather article, it is spreading, and whatever has the mildew must be burned with fire. The clothing, or the woven or knitted material, or any leather article that has been washed and is rid of the mildew, must then be washed again, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning contamination by mildew in woolen or linen clothing, woven or knitted material, or any leather article used for any purpose, for pronouncing them clean or unclean.